Oh.
They must have emailed you the slides already. We can put
You've
it up
sent
in
them?
the break. Yeah, Sakshi Gupta. It should be from Sakshi Gupta. If not sent, then I can
When
send
were
them
they
again.
sent?
Just a minute ago.
Oh, okay, okay. I haven't seen them
Then,
yet.
do you know the course rep, Chris Viraj? He's going to come over because he's standing up as well, so he can come over and speak in the break.
Okay, do you know when he's going to come?
Around 8, 7:30. 7:30
Okay,
or 8.
okay. All right. Maybe you can give me a sign when. Do
Yeah.
you know how this works? By the way, maybe you don't. I'm just wondering.
No.
It probably. Um,
Okay, that's a sign.
turn off. We don't want to press that, do we?
Do you need something from my team? Shall I
No.
call them?
Well, it should be. It should be simple. I'm just wondering how. Oh, no. Not that one, is it? Volume.
So, these. Sorry. No, wish to disturb you. I will go along with you.
Okay, okay, right. Does anybody have any IT expertise? Anybody Hi, hello. Hello, hello. Oh, good. Does anybody have any IT expertise that knows how to get the PowerPoint onto the screen? I've exhausted my efforts. Anybody? No. Do you know? It's I think I've tried most of the buttons. I don't know what. We want that onto the screen.
Is this on?
Hmm?
No, it's not on. How do
Projector.
You how do, you
So
turn on
do we need the
projector?
projector?
Yes.
Okay. Oh. What on earth is over? There's water. Ah. Yeah. Yeah. I spilt water all over my trousers. That looks really very embarrassing, doesn't it?
Santa.
I must have knocked that over.
Is this to turn the projector on and off?
Ah, good. Well, you try and fix that. Dear,
What
did I
is
do
it?
here?
Is this?
What?
This is this for the computer?
Ah, okay, maybe something isn't plugged in. Maybe that's the problem.
I'm trying to find that HD. Oh, give me this. HDMI ports.
So it's the projector. No, no luck?
I'm trying to see where this thing goes.
Any luck? Any luck? No.
Let's see.
Should we power the whole thing off and then start again?
Let's try that in.
Do you think there's something not plugged?
I don't know if that's meant to be plugged in.
Okay, let's put it off and see what happens.
Working. That wasn't plugged in.
I don't know what we did right, but anyway, there we are. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're hopefully about to start. Sorry about that technical issue there. Hello? Good. All right, we're going to maybe have a couple of breaks tonight by popular demand. So we'll try and go ahead for about 50 minutes, have a short break, and then resume. It's not the most sociable time of the day to be working as hard as I know that you are working. And you have to listen to me, which is maybe a challenge. But anyway, so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at certain subjects, agency, distribution, and structure, which, with some illustrations from commercial practice. This is a fairly broad subject, so there are a number of different parts to it. I've had a look at the book, one of the textbooks for the course, the one by Twig Fester. It's not very helpful on this subject. When I recommended it to you, I hadn't read the chapter on agency, but when I went through it, in a way, what he's saying is that the international rules, such as they are not effective at all. So there is some attempt to codify rules on agency, but in fact, very, very few states have ratified. In fact, 2 states have ratified the convention after about 40 years, which means basically this is a fairly unpopular convention. And I think they've got something like 7 signatories. Switzerland, France, almost no big names there apart from those countries. So, and Chile as well, but very, very few. So I don't think that's a terribly helpful chapter. So what I've tried to do in going through this subject is to put together a number of different aspects of agency, distribution, and structure, and I hope you can follow. But it might be rather heavy, so we'll have a couple of breaks. So the idea is to have a look at how we can organize cross-border commercial relations in relation to structure, and to familiarize yourselves with how certain types of businesses have approached this. So I'm going to be having a look at some energy examples. You won't be surprised. But in addition to that, I thought I might just have a look also at that new form of infrastructure called data centers that's part of the digital economy. And I'll have a few things to say about those as well. And then I also thought, well, we need a bad guy as well as good guys. So I thought I would introduce something just to make sure that you don't go to sleep that is all about the dark side of this subject. And I was very happy to find an OECD report that dealt with it. So just to make sure everybody's alert, I will be telling you a few things about some of the things that can go very badly wrong. And then also, just to make sure that you're alert and not dozing off, I'll also give you some of my personal experiences of some of those darker issues, which I have never sought to know anything about or be involved with, but unfortunately, in international commerce, sometimes you find yourself dragged into something which is not very pleasant. And I would be very surprised if some of you, in the future, as you go on to do whatever it is you do in your careers, if you perhaps have the misfortune to encounter some of these issues that I'm going to be talking about. So it's a good idea to know about them in the classroom when everything's nice and safe. And then later on, you'll be a little bit prepared, I hope, to think about some of these issues. I'm being a little bit mysterious deliberately, so you'll know what I'm talking about when I get to it. So this, as I said, the standard reading, chapter 5, isn't terribly helpful. I will go over what he has to say very briefly. Remember that here again, this is just a recap, the sort of things, the sort of challenges that cross-border, not intra-border, commerce has to deal with include time, distance, risk, lots and lots and lots of risk, and the risks are multiplying at the moment. And I'll have more to say in that shortly. Complexity, things are getting more and more complicated in terms of transactions. Actually, that's quite good for you in the sense that your skills are more likely to be in demand, especially if you're a well-organized and a calm person. You know, when all of this complexity is going on, if you're a person who can be very well organized and stay calm when you're dealing with unpredictable situations. Specialization, this is very much a feature of the modern commercial world. Some idea about that was given in way back in Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations. Right at the very beginning of it, he introduces an example of specialization that leads to a massive expansion of factory production way back in the 19th century. That's the sort of thing that people like Henry Ford picked up way back when he was producing his cars in mass production. Nothing very complex about it, but it was highly specialized factory production. With, by the way, a lot of standardization, because he was famous for saying, you can have any car you want, any color you want, as long as it's black. That was a joke. Basically, he mass-produced cars, and they were all one color. Volkswagen did the same thing in Germany, the people's car, originally. Predictability, that's getting harder and harder to do, but it's something that lawyers are always being asked to try and create. Can you create a predictable environment? Because otherwise the business people have problems with their calculations. How can they calculate a projected rate of return? They can't. All the accountants, all the business people, they want numbers. So they want as much predictability as possible. And it's getting harder and harder to do that in the current commercial environment. Transaction costs, well, in the last couple of classes from me and from Matthew last week, you get an idea that these are going up. And then people are always looking for alternatives as well. What alternative ways can we organize our business? And business people, to their credit, are pretty creative people. They're constantly coming up with new ways of achieving their objectives. Another thing I just wanted to remind you about is, in terms of the context, before we get on to the hard law, is just this, what we've been seeing in the past few decades. And most of you haven't been around for the last few decades, just maybe a couple of them or a little bit more than that. But let's go back just 30 years plus. What you got with globalization as it was then was a remarkable expansion of international commerce and a lengthening of supply chains in a way that everybody thought was normal. Those chains were just part of the new international economy, and there was nothing to worry about. Everything would be fine. The market would take care of everything. Now, at the moment, from where we are, if we look at that thinking, it seems incredibly naive. Markets are not very good at delivering certain things. Anything to do with climate change, for example, you can't rely on the market. It won't solve the problem. You need to have government intervention to do things. If you look at the rise of certain countries' economies in modern history, they would never have risen, whether it's Germany, whether it's the UK, United States, without some kind of industrial policy. China is a good example. So that sort of intervention in the market is actually quite normal, but for a certain period, everybody was massively optimistic about what markets could achieve. Long supply chains, don't worry, everything will be fine, and the supply chains got longer and longer. Things started to go very, very badly wrong in 2008 with a financial crisis. And the story of all that is actually quite remarkable in the sense that you had a few people. I don't know if you've ever seen some of those movies that were made about that period. What sometimes called the irrational exuberance, where greed was king, and people who made bets on the market eventually collapsing did very well in 2008 and 2009 because a crisis was in the making. And then after that, there was I would say a crisis trend over a period of several years. It appeared that there was one crisis after another. Now we could say those crises were pretty small by comparison with what we've been having in the last 5 years. So, and in those last few years, as you no doubt picked up from Matthew last week, we've had COVID, we've had invasion of Ukraine, we've had a series of market price volatility incidents, and a growing amount of interstate competition, and also more and more state intervention, and supply chain uncertainty. So this is the context that we're now in at the moment. Some people call it deglobalization. I wouldn't worry. I think it's probably just another phase of globalization. But it's a very volatile context that we're in. And in all of that, when businesses are trying to structure themselves to move into another country and establish themselves, they set up various relationships. And I've listed quite a few of them there. I'm not going to be going through all of them, just some of them. Agency is one of them, and various kinds of intermediary, like a subsidiary, can be set up in the countries concerned. So it's this idea of how you will structure your commercial relations when you go across borders that we're going to be having a look at. And here, you know, the risk I've mentioned before, mitigation of risk is enormously important. Various ways of doing that. I've written a few up here. Next week we will be dealing with dispute resolution, and I'm going to be having a guest speaker next week to come and talk a little bit about arbitration to help to supplement what I'm saying, and we'll be looking at force majeure as well again, which is very important. So all sorts of ways of mitigating risk become important. Here are just some examples of what you might read. A reading list, detailed reading list will follow in the next couple of days. I'll upload the slides as well. That book that I wrote a while back, chapters 4 and 5 can be useful. The downloads seem to be increasing. I think that's probably because of all the uncertainty in the oil markets. And here are the subjects that I'm going to be having a look at today. Agency, intermediaries, structure, some examples and illustrations, and some sources as well as we go along. Okay. So an agent is an individual or an entity who acts on behalf of another party, a principal, to create legal relations with a third party. Now, these agents have authority to make decisions, they can negotiate deals, and sometimes they can even sign contracts on behalf of their principals. Now, at the national level, the law of agency is pretty much an essential part of any curriculum. At the international level, it's slightly different, but some principles are the same. The agent has a fiduciary duty to the principal to put the interests of the principal ahead of their own or those of a third party. An intermediary, however, is a different kettle of fish. The intermediary may not always have the power to bind the principal, but instead, the intermediary, and I'm going to be saying a few things about intermediaries in a moment, the intermediary helps to connect, acts as a facilitator, it helps to connect buyers and sellers. It might include a distributor promoting and selling a manufacturer's products. Now, Twigg-Flessner points out that to try and standardize the rules about agency, there is a convention on agency. It is, however, not a success. The agency convention, that's 1983, is not generally accepted. Now, why? Well, it contrasts, only 7 signatories, as you can see on the third point there are only 7 signatures and 2 accessions so far. And it contrasts with the UNIDWAT principles of international commercial contracts, PICC, which are widely used to supplement contracts in international commerce. Chapter 2 of the PIC deals with agents. It addresses the formation and the authority of agents, and it offers a binding, but soft law, remember, soft law, that applies if the parties selected. Why has this not been influential, this convention? I've emphasized in the past the importance of model contracts. Standardization helps everybody, but sometimes it doesn't work, or it works in a very limited way. Here, it's not working well at all. Maybe the lack of influence is due to its limited scope, limited to contracts only for the international sale of goods. And that excludes other international commercial contracts that agents have negotiated. It focuses arguably on a harmonization of laws, trying to get neatness and tidiness rather than actually tackling the problems. So that may be another reason. But so far, I'm afraid, when it comes to agency, that convention has not been a success. Now, here we go. We start to have a look at intermediaries. Now, intermediaries, why would a company want an intermediary? Well, a big problem you've got when you go to another country is that you will probably not know how to do business in that country. Remember, there are 196 countries in the world. That none of us are going to have any idea how to do business in most of those countries if we want to expand, or if the company that we're in wants to expand. So there's a real problem in a global market. You might want to expand, you might be interested, but you have a big cloud of ignorance over your head. Getting an intermediary means that you get hold of someone, and it could be a law firm, it could be an accountancy firm, whatever, who knows about local market conditions. Also, they know about local customs. The custom might be about something simple like timing. Sometimes when you find in certain countries that they don't mind if things are done at the last minute. If you're a very well-organized person who likes to do forward planning, it can be rather frustrating, but it can also be a case that you misinterpret this pattern of behavior. But if you have somebody local who can advise you on this, they can tell you that this way of engaging in commercial negotiations is not something that you should be terribly worried about. It's normal practice. So an intermediary can be useful, and an intermediary could be many different kinds of entity or person. But the idea is that they are really a sort of conduit or a channel for the goods and services offered by the supplier to a consumer. Okay, the intermediary is a channel or conduit. And that could be an agent, a sales rep, consultancy firm, a supplier, distributor, reseller, subcontractor, franchisee, a joint venture partner. It can be a subsidiary. I've missed out the two letters there. And persons like lawyers and accountants. Now, with all this, the company is going to explore its potential opening abroad and will feel more secure by relying on an intermediary and the local knowledge, which will help the company to navigate that space. All of that very straightforward and I hope very clear. This is why we get it. Now, what happens if anything goes wrong? Here we go. They can provide a range of services, legal advice, research as part of due diligence. They can help companies identify business projects. They may act as local representatives. But besides their legitimate function, they can be involved in illegitimate activities. Now, this is where we start getting into the area of bribery and corruption. Now, the intermediary may be engaged in legitimate and illegitimate activity. The principal might not know what's going on, or the principal might know about it, but what is that expression? There may be, it may be in a position it tries to pretend it doesn't know. I think it's called plausible deniability. You deliberately try not to know so that you can then deny that you knew anything. It's a bit of a trick. And public procurement is a particularly sensitive area for this sort of activity. Now, none of this is new, and that's why I thought that it'd be a good idea to refer you to the OECD report that came out some years ago now on the role of intermediaries in international business transactions, because it looked at these activities, at how intermediaries can be, as it were, out of control, or indeed for certain companies, and you might be surprised at the big names that have been involved in naughty behavior in the past, and as a matter of fact, they have. I'll give you some examples. But one way or the other, this can be this can go on at some scale. So let's get down to the darker side of things. Now, 3 types. The OECD report said this is what happens when there is any of this kind of bribery and corruption involving intermediaries. Let's separate them out. Let's distinguish 3 types of relationship that we have to keep an eye on. The one at the top there, it's the officials, official or officials, family, friends, and other third persons who could act as intermediaries. I mean, some of this might be well-intentioned, but probably not. And also, you might get drawn into it because you're naive and you assume the person you're dealing with is straightforward. And you have to be very, very, very careful on this sort of thing. Well, I'll come back to that in a moment. Second type is where the intermediaries do not provide an identifiable service. Okay? The intermediary, you've got a relationship, your company's got a relationship with somebody who is supposed to be doing X or Y. Are they doing that? So you imagine if you're being regulated, or if somebody does a spot check on your business, they're going to ask, okay, you have a relationship to that firm, what do they do? Well, they do this. Now, can you show me any evidence that this has been done? And what are their instructions? Are they clear? Are they vague? And we'll go into this in a moment, and you'll see that there are lots of patterns. There are lots of red flags you can keep an eye out for. The third one is intermediaries who provide a combination of legitimate and illegitimate goods and services. So this can get quite complex, but you have to keep in mind that this sort of behavior is not peripheral. It happens at scale in the global economy. And you need to keep an eye out on it, especially now, because of the amount of government oversight of this sort of behavior. Maybe 20 years ago, at that time, remember when I was telling you the globalization, long supply chains, expansion, everybody was greedy, everybody was going to be rich, everything was going to be great. And that all came to a terrible end in 2008 with the financial crisis. Well, before then, lots of naivety, and lots of people would overlook things. And I remember, I've been around a little while, I remember very well some very reputable top people who nowadays are keep very quiet, who were quite happy in those days to say, trust the market, light touch regulation. Now that's fine for certain, probably for everybody, all of us, but there are certain people who will abuse that. And that's exactly what happened spectacularly when some people behaved very, very, in a very greedy, deliberately irresponsible way to make themselves very wealthy during that time. And there was also a great deal of crookery at the time. And the result is there's been a huge expansion in the amount of regulation of business I've got a small company myself, and I find it quite amazing the amount of regulation that I'm subjected to, despite the fact that it's a tiny, tiny company. But there are lots of rules, and what people sometimes call red tape, but it's just part of banks, for example. I've had a call from a bank saying, well, you had business with this country. Could you tell us what the business was? And it's like dealing with the police. I didn't have any choice. I had to say, well, it was this sort of a relationship. I was expert witness in an arbitral proceeding for the country. And it was explained, okay, that's fine. Tick. That's the end of it. But you've got certain people, as it were, in the back office of the bank checking on their customers. And certain people will be debanked. They'll be thrown out of their bank accounts if they are regarded as engaging in suspicious behavior. So there's a lot more regulation now. A lot of people are aware of what I'm just talking about, whereas maybe 20 years ago, you could get away with an awful lot of things. I knew a few people who were engaged in a certain amount of tax avoidance. Which I wasn't avoidance, I think it was evasion. I think it was probably illegal. But at that time, this is quite a long time ago, there really was very little oversight. That world doesn't exist anymore. Now there's a lot more checking. That doesn't mean to say that they've stopped this sort of behavior. It just means that in the world you go into and you work in, you must keep an eye out for the regulatory oversight. And secondly, unfortunately, you also have to keep an eye out on the people who engage in these practices. So two things. One is the oversight. The other one is the sort of people that are out there. Please do trust me on this. They are out there, and they will be very, very happy to take advantage of you in many different ways. I have found myself, it's partly why I'm emphasizing this, I found myself on several occasions being drawn into proceedings, legal proceedings, where corruption has played a part. Corruption, bribery, straightforward type of corruption. So people are given something and they take something, or fraud, it's quite. The amounts can sometimes be very, very big indeed. And the reason why I got involved is as an expert in the proceedings is just because they thought, well, here's an independent, trusted person, professor and so on, who can come in and give us an honest opinion. So that's how I got involved in one case, but I've been involved in at least two. And that one I remember was about something called sham, S-H-A-M, contracts. Have you heard of that? Sham. I think it's an English law expression. A sham contract is a fake. It's a fake. It's not fake news, it's a fake contract. But it's called a sham contract. Now, this, I'll just digress for a moment on this. The contracts, there were quite a few, actually there were quite a lot of them. There's a batch of them. And the accusation was made, but not in criminal proceedings, it was civil proceedings, that these contracts were fake contracts. And I was asked to give an opinion on them. And then they had somebody else on the other side giving an opposite opinion. But that was difficult. You might say, well, it must be straightforward. It's a fake or it isn't a fake. It's not as simple. It was from a country in which they had a lot of unusual practices when it came to drafting contracts. And it was in one of the post-Soviet countries. And they had the legacy of the Soviet period, central planning, very, very different from the common law approach. And I had some experience of those countries, so I was giving an opinion on these contracts. And it was in the commercial court here in the Rolls building in London. I produced what I thought was a fairly positive report. But I mean, without a doubt, there were slightly messy contracts. And then I got into the witness box, and I had to give an opinion on that. And the judge was like a lot of these judges, very clever, but also someone with a razor-sharp intellect. They put up a slide, and they showed me how the contract was supposed to be about drilling, the purchase of drilling vessels. And they showed a picture of the vessel, the amount of money that had to be spent to buy it, many millions. And then they showed where it was going to be used and the depth of the water. And it was one of these things where this is where barristers are very, very good. They pick up on a few facts and they tie them together, and they can come up with a very powerful argument. And they just showed me how that contract for the purchase of this drilling vessel would have been used in this area, in the Caspian Sea. And when I looked at it, I suddenly realized that the drilling was going, deep drilling was going to be in shallow water. And I started to think, whoops, there's something here that doesn't make sense. And that's when the judge said to me, Professor Cameron, is this the kind of provision you would typically see in an oil services contract for this kind of, for these services and the purchase of this vessel? And I looked at the picture, and I looked around at him, and I just, in a way, it was just eye-to-eye contact, and I realized, oh dear. And I said, no. And he looked at me as if to say, of course. In other words, it looked pretty fake. But it's the kind of, we're really talking about many, many, many millions of dollars. And there were a whole series of these contracts. The people concerned, I was quite sympathetic to them. You might think, oh, I must have been mad, but not true. But there was a group of people, and the main person had actually tried to set up a political party in his country in opposition to the president, who was one of these presidents for life. He didn't mind elections as long as he knew the outcome of the election before the election was held. So I was quite sympathetic to this poor man who had tried to oppose the president and then had to flee from the country. I thought he must be a good person. But actually, I think probably I was wrong. And we had a president who was not a likable man, and a group of business people who were probably very dishonest. However, so that was one of my experiences of so-called sham contracts. And of course, there were many intermediaries involved in this whole process. Well, let's go back to the slides. The OECD report, which I'll give you the reference to on the reading list, it's worth looking at, because some of the stories, they're quite short, but they're all based on fact, and there are more than a dozen cases of intermediaries being engaged in malpractice. So the OECD green case, I don't know why it's called green, but anyway, this one, the United States defendants negotiated contracts to be awarded, and they also negotiated the size of a bribe directly with an official in Thailand. And then the defendants transferred the bribes into an offshore bank account of the official's friend and daughter. And as you can see, they were found out. So much for the career of the Thai official. But also, you know, the American company was to blame because they encouraged that official to take the money and behave in a very bad way. An example of the second kind of behavior here, Siemens. Now, this is a very established, successful German company. And the next one is Baker Hughes, a very successful American companies. You know, they have engaged, or some of their officials, some of their employees have engaged in corruption, basically. So in this case, what happened was a Hong Kong-based consultant was hired to work on a power plant contract. He had no expertise. In fact, he was in charge of a clothing company, and he didn't have a clue about the power generation sector. So there we go. No expertise, and the consultant, did that clothing company provide any service in the power generation sector? Well, you won't be surprised, no. But the money was transferred. So money was paid to the consultant on a contract, and that was probably not a sham contract on the face of it. It would be it looked legitimate, but when you have the oversight and you check, then you discover that the person has no qualifications. This is why sometimes in auctions, in public tenders, you have pre-qualification, because that way you can check to find out if the companies genuinely have the expertise that they say they have. So I suppose I'm allowed to say this. Our finance minister, who's actually still our finance minister, famously or infamously said she worked for some years in a bank, and she was therefore very well qualified to deal with the country's finances. Well, it turned out that she was in a desk, I think it was dealing with either human relations or public relations, and that was the extent of her experience. But I think it had gone down on the CV as something more ambitious than that. And there's a lot of this goes on, a lot of it. So if you're dealing with an HR department now, that's one of the things they will check. Are you telling the truth about what you've done in your CV? Because there's a huge amount of this kind of fluffing or exaggerating of what people have done. I'm not quite sure why there's such a lot of it, but there is. So fake documentation is something that can be used, is used often to conceal the bribery. The sham contracts that I was looking at, which fooled me, I mean, they were messy, they were bad contracts, but I thought, okay, that country, that history, maybe they're legitimate. But so you have to look at, I suppose some of you have done this as well with your sort of elementary training on how to use the internet and so on. You must have, I don't know if you've had any sort of courses that you have to do as a student. I have to do them as a member of staff, but there are lots of things that you have to study to find out if there's a scam taking place and all sorts of red flags and so on. So fake documentation will increase with the use of AI, and you can expect that some of it will be very, very good indeed. So in the world you're moving into, in international commerce, there'll be a lot of AI helping people to produce extremely good fakes. A challenge. Language as well. Here you've got the example of Baker Hughes, US firm, very distinguished US firm, but some of its employees hired an agent to assist in obtaining a contract with a Kazakh state-owned oil company. Now, the agency agreement was 1 page long, too short. and it required the agent to carry out, quote, laboratory and field experiments, and, quote, marketing functions, unquote. Now, there was no evidence that this vague stuff was actually carried out. But, of course, the agent was paid. Quite possibly, they get paid a lot for not doing these different tasks. The final example, where the intermediaries provide a combination of both legitimate and illegitimate activities, is this one. Here, in this kind of situation, the company retains a business consultant as an intermediary, but the consultant will perform actual services. It's not a sham, they will do something, but those services may be of an improper nature. Now, here we are, the consultant may be asked to bribe an official, and the official might be encouraged to tailor the terms of reference for a public tender to favor the company. Now, there's a lot of this sort of thing goes on, and one of the consequences is that some people who are smart enough to realize they don't want to be involved in this, or they don't want to take any risks, they will not engage in certain types of business. Years ago, I got involved with a Danish company, very pleasant experience, and they bid on many contracts, and sometimes they won, and I was involved with them and happy to work with them. But I remember the last one that I got involved with was for a contract in Russia. And they put in a bid, it was a good bid, very good promise to deliver certain services. It was an EU contract. And they, basically a lot of it was managed, but the contract award was managed by people who were in Moscow at the time, many years ago now, and in conjunction with some EU officials. And the Danish people called me up and said, well, I'm afraid we haven't won, but really it looks like we didn't have much of a chance, because what was going on was that the bidding for the contract wasn't the bidding under the terms of reference. It was that bidding plus a certain amount of bidding of amounts, as it were, under the table. And they said, we can't do that. And to their credit, the Danish are very like that, a bit like the Norwegians, are very straightforward, very anti-corruption, and generally speaking, they're not involved in that sort of behavior. So I was quite happy that I was with the team that were like that, but they were sad. They said they didn't have a chance, but certain other nationalities did not have those scruples. And I'm not going to tell you which countries they were. They were European ones, but eventually one of them was successful, and because of the amount of money that they paid as an incentive. I think that was the last time I got involved in anything in that particular line of consultancy, because it just is too messy. One of the things you're always going to be super careful about, if you get a sense that something is like this, if it's dubious, politely just pull back and keep away from it, get out of it. Don't run away. It attracts too much attention, but just sort of quietly get out of it, because your reputation takes years to build up, years and years, and you can lose it overnight. Very serious. You know, whatever company you're in, whether you're an individual, this is all enormously important. So here we are. I think that you can read the rest of the slide yourself. The last point is that the principal's involvement could be ignorance, but it could also be negligent failure to supervise the subsidiary. That's something you want to keep an eye on, because Nowadays, with regulatory oversight, there can be a duty on you, whatever you might be, Rio Tinto, you might be Anglo-American, you might be Siemens, but there will be a duty on you in law to keep an eye on your employees, to have a code of conduct that will govern your employees and their actions, and you're supposed to monitor it regularly. And that sort of thing is part of corporate governance nowadays. So you can't say things like, we didn't know anything that was going on. That's a sort of excuse which will not be successful now. And here are just some of the things. How would you deal with all this? If this is going on, the OECD report gives plenty of examples of it taking place, but one of the things you can do is to ask, do we need an intermediary? Is it necessary? Or are you just hiring somebody because you think it will help? No, you should check. And also, you should have a code of conduct for your employees. Most companies do now. I've mentioned India there because I thought it was interesting that the government of India took the view some time ago now. In the armaments sector, they simply put a ban on the use of agents for many years. They just said, look, we know what they do. The evidence is overwhelming. Prohibited. We're not going to have them. A drastic prohibition, but it's an indication that zero tolerance is for them the best way of dealing with the problem, because you could have a softer approach, and you find people just abuse it. Due diligence procedures can be introduced and enforced. And with due diligence is quite a controversial topic because the question is, how much do you need to do to be properly diligent? And also, have you documented all that you've done? And for you, it's probably easier to think, well, what's difficult about this? Keeping pieces of paper, keeping a report. But actually, in the world that you're going to be in, the world of international business, you'll find quite a lot of people are not like you. They are business people. They're entrepreneurs. They're excited about what they do. They're women, they're men who just think, hey, this is an opportunity. We could really, really do something exciting and make a lot of money as well out of it, legally. And they've got a certain way of doing things which is very different from the way of a lawyer. It's different from the way of an accountant. And lawyers often exasperate them because they tend to say, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. So why is it the lawyers always telling me I can't do things? And they get the business person, all the skills, the talent, the soul of the business person is very different usually from that of a lawyer. So you have to be careful with your expectations that they're not necessarily the sort of people who keep lots of good records. Everything's written down, noted, date, signed, and whatever it is. They can be messy. And that's something which somebody told me about a long time ago. I've met a few business people, and it helps to get a sense of what they're really like. But you find judges, lawyers, arbitrators will have some difficulty in understanding the messiness of the business person's way of doing things, especially when you get to the smaller types of businesses, maybe a venture capitalist or maybe a startup. If you think about some of the people who are pretty young, who start up companies, and who can be fabulously successful quickly. There are many of those who fail, but some succeed. They're not the sort of people who are very good at record keeping. So the arbitrator or the panel of arbitrators or the judge can come along and say, well, what about your records? I mean, surely you did due diligence? Yes. But how did you do it? Well, I can't remember. It was something like blah, blah, blah. And do you have any paper? I think so. I'm not very sure. This kind of stuff. And it doesn't sound very convincing. At worst, you might think, is this person hiding something? Actually, they're not. It's just business is different. And you should try and remember this and not be too judgmental, but also try and help somebody since they're not necessarily engaged in bad behavior. It's a different sort of behavior when you're a business person. I had this when I was an arbitrator with a panel of people who were clever, public international lawyers, but I thought they were very unsympathetic to the business person, and they were taking the view that he had not done sufficient due diligence and had now lost his money, and therefore he didn't deserve to have the damages. And I took a softer view. I wasn't sure whether he should have got all the money, but certainly a softer view. So due diligence is something you want to keep in mind. Yes, it's necessary, but you, if you're a lawyer, might have to help the person to understand what they need to do in terms of record keeping for a future eventuality that they think will never happen, but you know it could happen. Something, a dispute, some problem, and you must have some bit of paper that tries to cover you. And you need to look at that bit. If you've got the bit of paper from, say, a local law firm, some of the cases I've been involved in Spain, investing in renewable energy, solar parks. The paper was provided by a Spanish law firm, and it said regulatory risk is very, very, very minimal. But we can't rule out the possibility that there may be a significant change. Something like this. So good news and then a caveat, and the point of the caveat is to protect the local law firm. They're not dumb. They know something might go wrong, and they have to cover themselves. So they do that, but the problem is later if something does go wrong, that piece of paper has got the good news and then the caveat. And the caveat, in a way, undermines the value of the good news. So there we are. So that's something that you should be aware of. Several international organizations have adopted legal instruments to deal with foreign bribery through intermediaries. And you'll be able to see in that report, if you can have a look at it on the reading list, what I mean. Well, look, I promised we were going to have a break, so I think we could probably do it at this point. I wanted to move on to sectors. And I know you've had quite a bit of examples from energy, but I thought I'd maybe just tell you a little bit about data centers, which are very topical these days, and the kind of structures that are emerging in the infrastructure of these data centers. But I think I'll do that after we've had a short break of 10 minutes, if that's okay with you. Yeah, short break? I don't hear any objections, so I think the answer is yes. So let's stop for 10 minutes. All right? Okay.
Have you given the code yet?
What?
The code of attendance. Have you given them?
Yes. Does anybody want the code of attendance yet? Shall I give it to you now? Okay. JL, oh, you're going to do it, so okay, just JL, John Louise, that's not one person, John Louise, JL, GR, as in Gordon, Rebecca. I'm making this up as I go along, but anyway, GR. And then HC, H, House of Commons. HC, there you are. You didn't expect that one. So JLGRHC. Okay. Did you want to, do you want to make an announcement?
I just have a presentation. I mean, I just wanted to show ask people to vote.
Okay. Have you got the slides?
I think I actually sent it to you.
To me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we do it after the break, after everybody's gone?
Okay.
But they'll come back.
Yeah.
Like, can you help me just so that I'm wondering how where do we get this?
It's on your Outlook.
So you sent it to me, which means that I've sent you a connection. Is that you? No, I don't think so.
No, that's on LinkedIn. It's on your Outlook.
Right, what have we got? Let's just take my microphone off here. This is you here, slides for elections.
Yeah.
Okay, now, get it onto this.
Or I'll just speak with people right now so that I won't have to disturb you as well. Okay? I'll just speak with people who are leaving right now. So that before they leave, I can get their votes.
You can wait till we come back. Like, some of them are already gone. We have to get the slides up.
Okay, yeah.
It's all right, I don't mind. I'm quite. Well, I'm just wondering how.
It's fine then. I'll just do it physically. Just announce it physically. It's okay if there's no presentation. I'll just announce it. Yeah. Thank you. Ravi?
So you received for further season after that. Okay. What will you be doing actually if you are elected? So here is
Oh, hello.
Oh, yeah. Just a quick question. You mentioned that you were a barrister. That you were a barrister in the meanwhile.
Yes.
Just because advice, how do you go about becoming an advocacy exercise? They used to do meeting in the past, but this is like a different scale.
There is a course on advocacy that is part of the LLM, I believe. Advocacy in international commercial.
To be more specific, I'm doing this community in July. I'm just asking around sort of for like what were your experience with it? The main issue, this point, sort of the fear. And that's sort of how did you go about it if you had it?
I don't understand. What is a sort of...
So basically, it's two spoken oral assessments, to be written assessments over a course of 5 days or something like that. And what I'm going to have to do is, it's a mock, well not a mock trial, it's just presenting in front of a criminal case in front of a mock judge with a, well I'm just thinking, because I'm struggling with something with confidence barrier.
Oh, yes, yeah, okay.
That's sort of my main issue, just talking loud, all that, that's fine, it's just that's the issue. How would you sort of, do you ever experience that in your career?
I have not done a lot of advocacy, so no, I'm not the right person. I'm trying to think for. In terms of practicing yourself, it'd be quite good if you could get an advocate to listen to you. You stand up and they'll, I had it as part of my tutelage. I had to stand up and do it in front of advocates. For the most part, they were okay. One was very rude. I remember he interrupted and shout and say, that's not right. And so on. Which is not very helpful, actually. It's very awkward when people do things like that. It's also quite useful if people listen to you and make comments on what you're saying, because sometimes when you're asking a question to the other side, it can be a leading question. You can be slapped down. It's better if somebody who's friendly does it, because if it's a judge, they will not be too friendly. Probably they'll be rather brutal. So is it somebody you're looking for to listen to you, or you?
I'm doing my own sort of networking to find more people. I'm just asking you as like an initial point, because you had the barrister question as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there's a confidence. Sometimes if you stand in front of the mirror and you just talk to yourself, I mean that sounds mad, but you can see yourself. And you may think this is crazy, I shouldn't be doing that, but if you can just get used to seeing that person doing it in front of other people, it's one way of sort of getting rid of your inhibitions. But there are things online that you can get that help with confidence, public speaking. Those are very, very common.
So it's specifically in that course like court setting, that's the problem. The problem itself is not the problem.
Yeah.
It's just in the sort of pressure and stress of being in a court. I know I could sort of find some competitions around London, so much fun. Like, you didn't really deal with that.
All I did, I went out in the port and I found with a group of people, and I had to present as part of a team. And I'm not really sure if I did a very good job. It didn't matter, I passed. That was all I needed to do. So I'm probably not the right person to ask about this. I'd like to help. As for me, it was just a box ticking exercise. I had to do it. I got it in the past. I never did it again. So,
Yeah, thank you.
so sorry about that.
That's fine. Cheers.
Okay, I'll try and do that next week. On arbitration. Yeah. So, anything else,
Like, we really enjoyed the class and they thought you were very structured.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Sorry, I'm ringing up because they emailed me about this weekend about it. That's fine. Yeah, no, like, they were saying even like a day before something like that would be very helpful.
Yeah, okay. I'll try and get that done for next week. I'll try and get the this is the first time I've done this course, so it's not like, so I'm having to do a lot of things from base level. It's very basic. So today the slides are done at the last minute, but last week, the final version I received a little bit late, so but next week we'll try and get the slides up for you. I'll push that. Okay.
Yeah, with that and the exam, I think we want to try
Yes.
the only two.
Yeah, exam, he's doing all that, and I think he was working on it 3 days ago. So there should be something in there.
A lot of people were asking me like we don't understand what is in the exam and that. That's something that I'm going to be
That's
learning about.
reasonable, yeah, and I can't help on that because I haven't seen that. I'll probably have to come forward with some suggestions.
Yes, because we're having a meeting with the course of that to gather the feedback of the weekend for it and contact I'd rather bring up to the bring up to the board and then
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, that's all right. Right. Okay, everybody, I think there was yes, there is. I think before I get going, could we maybe just have a democracy interlude, and we have our maybe a couple of things. Just I don't know if you know that there is a trip to Middle Temple Inn of Court. I hope that's been communicated to you. I'm not sure who's going, but I'm the one who's been setting it up. But that's been through the student reps, so just in case anybody wants to visit the Inn of Court, there is that opportunity for you. So I think that's taking place on, when is it? Is it April? April, or is it?
20th.
Is it what?
20th.
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 Monday the 20th of April. Yeah, a group of us will be going to the Inn of Court. They did offer lunch. Unfortunately, the lunch isn't free, and so we just decided that we weren't going to be paying the money for lunch. So it's just a morning tour of the Inn of Court for anybody that wants to visit it. Okay, so that's my bit of information, and then other things. Just trying to think that you might be interested in. Yeah, next week we'll have. I think I already said this. We'll have Ben Jaretta, who's from the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and he's, I think, sort of the Deputy Secretary General of the Chartered Institute. And he's going to be coming along and sort of interacting with me on the subject of dispute settlement. So I thought he'll have he's done a lot of practice. So I thought he might be a useful contact for you as well, for anybody who's interested in arbitration, dispute settlement, that kind of thing. So for heaven's sake, don't be shy. Introduce yourselves to him if you want to. He is closely linked. I think it's the Board of Trustees he's on of the Chartered Institute. And that anybody who's interested in maybe doing mediation or arbitration in the future, becoming a member, that sort of thing, he can tell you what you need to do to become a member. And these days it's a very, very international group of people at the Chartered Institute. They also have a diploma in commercial arbitration that they offer in Oxford, in a course in September, I think it is, which Professor Baltag is in charge of. And if you do that, I'm afraid it's not free, but if you do that, you then are eligible to become a sort of an associate of the Chartered Institute, which is quite good for you. Anyway, that's next week. So next week it'll be slightly varied, a little bit more like what it was like last week, except that the subject matter will be very, very focused on arbitration. And if you want to ask questions about the relationship to litigation, relationship to mediation, and so on, you can do that because Ben knows a lot about these subjects. He used to work in Singapore. That's when I first met him. He worked in Singapore for, I think it was Norton Rose, one of those firms in there. So that'll be next week. And I maybe just mention to you, anybody who's interested in renewable energy law and disputes, and I don't think there'll be many of you, but if there is anybody, keep in mind that there's going to be a special event that deals with renewable energy law on, I think it's scheduled, it hasn't been advertised, it's May the 14th. And we will be holding that event. There'll be a few places for students, not many, but a few. And we'll be holding that not on campus. It will be at a firm called Ashurst near the Liverpool Street Station area. So anybody we've got a number of companies that will be talking about wind turbines and legal disputes to do with them, and it'll be very, very commercial in its orientation. So that's my announcements. I'm not trying to get in your way because I know you've got a democratic announcement that you want to make about the elections for whatever it is you want to be elected to. But so here we are. We have a little departure here for yourself. Go ahead.
Hi guys, my name is Prithviraj and I'm the course rep for commercial and corporate law, and I'm also the postgrad rep for the entire postgrad students of the Queen Mary University. And I'm standing for the elections this time for the post of president. And I know most of the elections, it's all undergrad students, but I really appreciate your support because I can ask support to only the LLM students and the postgrad students that I'm actually friends with and all my cohorts. So I really appreciate your support. It will take literally 1 minute to just cast your vote. And you can go on the website. I've sent a message on the groups as well. It will take just 1 minute to vote. So yeah, please do cast your vote. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor.
Oh, okay. Right. Very, very good. Okay, well, there we are. So, democracy in action. So that was a very short but sweet break there. Okay, let's go back to this, looking at agency structure, distribution, and so on. Structure of commercial activities. So you must know that about 5 years ago, we would not be talking about data centers because they were not topical. Nobody cared about them. There were not many of them that existed, and nobody was interested. Now it's a very, very hot topic as a form of infrastructure, which is growing very fast because the amount of money that's coming into, the amount of capital that's being invested in digital digital matters, but especially in data centers, is huge. And it is a good example of leasing and vertical integration and some new commercial structures that are evolving even as we speak. So I thought I'd just introduce you to a few thoughts about this before moving on to look at maybe at the energy sector. So these large infrastructure investments are really a way of organizing commercial transactions through structured long-term contracts, and they're based on a number of things like co-location, where co-location is where you have basically co-location, a data center alongside maybe a power plant. It could be the leasing of a structure. These are huge structures. They're enormous. I don't have a picture, but they're very, very big indeed. A bit like 1 or 2 football pitches in terms of size. And they manage services under agreements that can last for 5 to 15 years. The structure of a data center investment varies, but they're sometimes organized through, often they're organized through something called an REIT, which you'll have encountered in other areas, I hope, a real estate investment trust, REIT. So if it's not that structure that's used for the investment, it could be a joint venture, or it could be a sale and leaseback arrangement. And then we also have something called a different kind of lease called a hyperscale lease. And these hyperscale leases are long-term partnerships of up to 20 years, between 10 and 20 years, where the developer of the data center builds the structure and then leases it to a major tech company. So you've got the developer of the infrastructure, then you've got the user or the operator, which could be Google, Amazon, Meta, or Microsoft, and these involve constructing certain sites to specific standards. They use a lot of water, so they need to be near a good water supply, and without a very good energy supply, nothing will happen. So these structures are structures that need a great deal of assurance of an energy supply. And as you can imagine, they need it 24/7, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They need to have their supply of energy. It needs to be guaranteed. You could probably imagine that presents, well, at least one problem, but maybe 2. One problem is, how do you get access to the grid? You need to connect to a public grid, to an existing grid. That other people want to connect to it as well, especially with the expansion of green energy, wind power, solar power. It depends which part of the world you're in. It might be more wind or more solar. But the green power is expanding, and they also want connections. But you must know that big characteristic of renewable energy is its interruptibility. That's to say that sometimes the wind does not blow, the sun doesn't shine. And in the northern part of Europe, we sometimes have periods when there's very little sun and there's almost no wind. So you get a major problem for the most commercial types of renewable energy, wind and solar. They're just not working. What do you do? Well, if you're in charge of a data center, this is completely unacceptable, this risk. You can't have it because it just means that your cloud system would crash. And you'll have a lot of angry customers. So what they have to do is to work out a system of backing up any renewable energy power that they're relying on by batteries or diesel or something else. Or they can simply decide we don't want renewables. So there is a bit of a risk with the expansion of all of these data centers that they decide not to use as energy a green renewable form of energy for the sort of reasons I've just been mentioning, that it carries with it a risk. They may decide to go for nuclear, and that's what's happened in the United States. Some of them have decided that they want nuclear plants beside the data center, or they build a data center beside an existing nuclear plant. But there are not actually all that many nuclear plants around, and the smaller nuclear plants that have been promised, small modular reactors, have actually never been commercialized. So that's not really much of an option. So your nuclear option is somewhat limited. Your renewable one has a downside. So you get back to fossil fuels. So there's a bit of a question, we don't know the answer to this one yet, about how the most important feature for making these systems work, energy, is actually going to be supplied. It's not at all clear how that's going to be done, but they are trying to develop large batteries so that will store electricity, and that will provide a backup. So there's a huge amount of technological innovation going on, partly because of this need by data centers to get a regular supply of energy. Anyway, I'll come back to that in a moment. The need for water is also very, very important. Now, linked to this is a question partly about you, that you and me, we need a supply of electricity, and we prefer it not to be too expensive, thank you. To do that, with these big consumers coming on to the system, becomes a challenge because their needs are huge. They need to have a huge amount of electricity supplied to them. That means that electricity that might be going to you and me might become a bit scarce, and the price of the electricity might start to go up. This is what a lot of people think is going to happen. So you have this great big pressure on the system by these new consumers that will push the price of electricity up, unless you can expand the existing grids and deliver much, much more electricity. And I mean a lot more electricity. Okay, so there's quite a big problem there, which I don't know the answer to it, happily not one that we need to consider. It's a sort of energy poverty issue. Okay, well let's have a look at what these companies are doing to try and address some of the problems they've got in expanding. Now, many of these data centers exist in the United States, but there's a fair number of them exist in countries where the investors are maybe American, but the investments are actually not in America. Ireland, for example, has something like, I think about 20%, at least 20% of all data centers in the whole of Europe. And they're not built by Irish investors. They're built by foreign investors, many of them. And you have already had, in the case of Ireland, electricity consumers upset at the rising price of electricity. And it's gone up partly because of the data centers. So here you have the wholesale colocation projects. Large tenants like cloud providers will lease entire suites or halls that have 1 to 20 megabytes of electricity. They use contracts which are focus on bulk power and space. But interestingly, there's a trend towards integrated infrastructure platforms. And they consider the problems in many countries for foreign investors, and the problems are fairly much threefold. One is grid connection delays, two is price volatility, and the other one is, of course, supply chain constraints. So remember at the very beginning I said there was a period when people were very optimistic about supply chains. That's all gone. And unfortunately, the problems about supply chains are particularly strong when it comes to the greener forms of energy. Problems about essential instruments like blades for a wind farm, minerals that are required to make certain parts of solar panels. So the supply chain element becomes a very much a source of risk and vulnerability. What do the innovative companies do? They try and mitigate the risk by bringing in all of these sources of vulnerability to an integrated structure. So you get a vertical integrated structure. And this has begun to develop, as I'll explain. So the structure of the investment changes in order to try to protect the company against these risks that I've just mentioned. How? You've got, for example, a problem with connecting to the grid. How do you deal with that? One of the ways of dealing with it is get rid of that, leave the grid alone, and get a separate source of power. So you, in a way, you build your own kind of island, your own economic unit, and that has begun to be tried in certain areas. So that's the last point on that slide where I've said that you've got projects that try to coordinate design, construction, and a guaranteed delivery of power within one single investment platform. That's a new structure. There aren't many examples of this, but here's one of them from the United States. And you can see here an idea about the money that's involved, that this particular vertically integrated structure is costing $4 billion. And this one is based in Dallas, but there could be others in various parts of the world as the demand for digital, for AI, for example, grows. So this project is one of the largest single-site developments in the world, and the joint venture structure that is used contains an operating company, a company that does all the operating, but also an energy specialist company. So these are the two kinds of skill sets that come together to make the joint venture. And this is an example of a strategic alliance between the company that has the skills to deal with infrastructure and investment therein, and on the other hand, an energy producer. And the goal is basically to try to develop a competitive advantage over the alternatives. Because all these companies, Google, Meta, and Amazon and so on, they are all competing against each other very, very aggressively. So they're not like a cartel. They're engaged in competition, a competition to innovate in commercial structures as well as in tech. Okay, now, everybody I hope can hear me all right. Yes, okay? The microphone's working. Good, good. Yes, good, I like that. But by bringing in, by dealing with these risks, which everybody seems to be facing at the moment, with grid connections, prices going up and down, and so on. By bringing them into the single project, you reduce massively your risk profile, and you also are in a position in which you can deploy your unit much faster. One of the things you might be aware of, but certainly when it comes to connecting to a grid, you've got a queue system, or I don't know what they would call it. In America, would say a line. People are waiting in a long line to get access to the grid, and it means you will have to wait for several years before you get the connection. It's not like 6 months; it's worse. It's more like 6 years. So that is a huge problem. And you may ask why. Well, one of the reasons is some people who think that they will be in business, and they think they've got a good business model, and they go ahead and they book, or they try to book, some capacity on the grid, and they help to make the queue longer because they are planning in advance. But in the meantime, in the next, say, 2 or 3 years, they might just collapse. Their business, their plans might just go astray, and but in the meantime, they add to the length of the queue. So this is where your data centers, run by very, very impatient people, or planned by people who have absolutely no interest in waiting. They're in a hurry. You know, that sort of Jeff Bezos mentality, or move fast and break things and all that stuff. They really want to get everything done. They don't want to be in a queue. And they're forced to be in a queue in most countries because they just can't get the connection. This is a way of saying, okay, we don't need to care about the queue. We don't need to be directly connected to that source of electricity. We've got another source and another small-scale grid. And then, so then immediately they've got a competitive advantage. So that's the thinking. So this is a trend that can transform the data center developments from traditional real estate assets into dynamic infrastructure platforms. Probably two last things I would just mention before I wrap up on this. One is that the growth of these very, very large investments in infrastructure does present some risks to the expansion of the greener kinds of energy. As I've mentioned, sometimes they're not ideal for powering these investments. But if they're not appropriate, does that mean you're going to get a revival of fossil fuels? And that turns on its head the idea that we should be moving towards a greener, more cleaner source of energy. So there's just a question, that's all, because I don't know any answer to this. It's more like a dilemma that you could be pushing the data centers, they could be massively expanding, but as they're doing that, they need energy. And is it going to be clean, largely, or is it going to be not clean? What's the balance going to be? We don't know the answer yet, but there is that question. And it affects more and more countries around the world which are expanding their data centers, and also seeing the advantages of renewable energy, not least in terms of energy security. It's not just about having a cleaner form of energy, but a lot of countries in the so-called global south are experimenting with renewable energy just because it adds to a healthy, balanced energy mix. That's one point. The second point I want to make, which is maybe a little bit awkward for me to explain as a non-engineer, a non-specialist, the way that these data centers work is usually misunderstood, because you assume that what's going to happen is they need a quantity of electricity. They need access to the grid, and you're going to use a lot of electricity. That's partly true, but it's also partly misleading, because the way they use it is not like the way you and I would use it, or even a big company. There's been some modeling in the United States of how they operate, and it shows that they have a tendency to spike their use of electricity. And it's not like once or twice in the day. They can suddenly spike many times during the day. And it can be just because of the demand for the use of cloud facilities, for AI, suddenly up. And then the demand for electricity at those moments when it's at the top is very, very high. It's like a large percentage of your whole national electricity supply is required at that moment. So it's that chart of like that, which is new. We haven't seen that before. Because when you and I use it, we would decide we're going to have dinner at a certain time. I don't know when you have your dinner in the evening. So it's just say it's 6 o'clock. So lots of us will have dinner at 6 o'clock. At that moment, you put the kettle on, you boil things, you use electricity. So there's a spike. So you can detect this in the use by people like ourselves of the electricity system, a spike at certain times of the day. But it's a very simple spike. It's at certain times, and you can predict that use will be intense at these times. These data centers don't use it like that. The spike will be sudden and very intense, and it runs the risk of destabilizing your entire grid. If they're connected to the grid, the public grid, there's the risk that these sudden spikes might destabilize the system. And you might think, that isn't going to happen. Well, actually, it has happened already in Spain, probably about a year ago now. They had what's called an outage, when suddenly something like more than 50% of the Spanish electricity network collapsed. And it collapsed in seconds, just so fast. And they've done a report into it, and initially they said it was because in Spain they invested far too much in solar power, and it destabilized the system. Our recent report said that's nonsense, not true, but they're not terribly sure what caused it. But this is quite a source of I'm mentioning this just it's a source of concern, and it's very much a part of the world that you'll be moving into. But as far as the companies are concerned, the commercial side of it, you'll see here that the risk-averse companies just try and pull in the uncertainty into a kind of special structure that protects them from grid constraints and from grid access problems, grid connection problems, and price volatility as well. So they're trying to, it's the imagination, the entrepreneurial side of these people to try and develop a commercial structure that protects them.
I have a question, but mostly regarding how this is regulated and how do these data centers can connect to the grid. It's just even though we see, or because of that spikes of possible changes of energy, there's new regulations for them, like in that moment they want to connect to it.
This is very controversial. The questions about the regulation. If there are these risks, what's happening on regulation? Well, if you look at the United States, President Trump is very, very keen that there should be the minimum of regulation. Now that's the kind of the old free market approach, which you do not get in Europe, and I don't think you'll get anywhere else as well, because there's a real public interest aspect to this. And also, if you're a politician and you're in a democracy, you'll be aware that voters, citizens, could be affected by grid instability. And the moment that they lose the internet, they lose access to heating and so on, or air conditioning, if it's hot, they will not be voting for you in the next election. In fact, they'll be wanting an election tomorrow so they can vote you out. So it's something that these companies are worried that there'll be too much regulation. So that's why, for example, they lobby the White House very, very intensively to say, please, keep the regulation absolutely minimal. And it's very powerful stuff for them because it's all about money, big, very, very, very large amounts of money. And so they push very hard to have the minimum of regulation, and they're pushing very hard against the EU to keep the regulations in the EU as basic as possible. But from our point of view as citizens, we want regular supplies of electricity at sensible prices. So and this is something that is going to be increasingly at stake from all of this. As politicians get put under pressure to develop the digital economy, and of course they will say, well, it will lead to jobs. Maybe. Be careful. I heard all this with renewable energy. It will lead to many, many, many jobs. Not really. Some of these industries are not big on job creation, and they can grow, and some people will make a lot of money, but not many jobs will necessarily be created. Okay, any other questions, or shall I move on? So you've got a lot of innovation there in terms of structures, but it's evolving. It's very much something that's it's a case of watching this space. You don't know what's going to happen next, but you can see how some of these companies who have very deep pockets, lots of money, in a way are trying to create a context, a fortress almost, where they have their energy, their water supply, their access to a different grid, and then they can go ahead and produce the commodity that generates their wealth. Right, so I think that's probably everything from that particular sector. The other sector, we can have a break in a few minutes. The other sector that I wanted to have a look at was the natural resources sector, and historically, again, these firms have invested heavily outside of their home base. They've engaged in cross-border commercial transactions, and they have done that in ways that have explored joint venture arrangements, different kinds of joint venturing arrangements, and different types of corporate structures as well. Incorporation and non-incorporated forms of company. And I thought we could have a look at the renewable sector as well. One of the things I don't know at the moment is whether you have many standard forms of contract to do with these data centers, but I will be coming on to that on the renewable side. Here, the standardization of contract practices is quite notable in this particular area that I'm dealing with, that I'm going to talk to you about now. Then I'll say a few things about the renewable side. And what's very striking, if I just anticipate, is that on the renewable side, there are no established model contracts. So you saw way back at the beginning with the agency convention how an attempt was made to try and harmonize the laws, and it was a flop. It didn't work, maybe for various reasons. On the data side, or the data center side, it's too early to say. You do get power purchase agreements that are fairly standard formats, for sure, but it's an emerging industry. This is not. This is an old set of industries. We dealt with gas last week, so I won't do gas transportation now. But when it comes to the oil industry, they have often used model contracts in their joint venture arrangements. So you get models produced by associations in Canada, United States, UK, Norway, Australia. There are lots of models. And the point about a model is always to try and cut down the amount of time that you need to draft your contract. It saves money, and it's very helpful to people like yourself if you ever worked in any of these companies, because you can get your hands on a model. A problem with a model is always that it's a model. It's designed for a wide range of situations, and your situation will be, whatever it is, will be unique. Your project will have elements in it that are very specific. Therefore, you will have to adapt any model that you use to your particular project. And one small aside, which fits with something I was saying way back at the very beginning about new market entrants. Remember, always keep an eye on the technology, keep an eye on the parties. Who are the parties to the commercial transaction? Are they, say, private equity, hedge funds? Are they standard established companies that have maybe been involved in this business for many, many years? If they are familiar with the way of doing business, they will look at the model differently from somebody just coming into the business. Somebody coming into business is going to ask, I'm afraid, some dumb questions. But that's okay, that's just because they're new. But there'll be a lot of things they don't understand. But those people, you have to keep in mind that they exist, and it's healthy as part of the system renewing itself. You have new players coming in. But they will, when it comes to models, they will have to understand a lot of the basics and have things explained to them, whereas many other people will not, if they've been in the business for a long time. One small final point on that. One of the things I've noticed is, which surprises me, is that with companies, they don't necessarily have much of a memory. They don't. The contract design, the practices. You might think, well, these companies have been doing this for maybe 20, 25 years. But the same people in the companies have not necessarily been doing these things. So as the older people retire and they go, you might think it's logical that other people should, as it were, sort of carry the torch forward and take the expertise on. That doesn't necessarily happen because the logic of the company is what makes us money. And they may just think, well, in that area, we need fewer people, so there might be fewer people who can, as it were, inherit that expertise from the older people. I had a conversation, I think, last week with somebody in a big energy company, and somebody higher up had asked him how one of these standard agreements was worked and who knew about it. And he said, well, there are only two people left who know how this agreement works, who are really, really on top of it. I'm one of them, and there's somebody, I don't mean me personally, he said to me, he was one of them, and he's the vice president of this company, and there was somebody else he mentioned. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because this is one of the biggest energy companies in the world, and basically, what you're telling me is that this type of agreement is something that most people in your company don't understand. And that was a bit of a surprise to me. These things you pick up when you actually meet business people. They're really, you don't read them in books. They just surprise you. You think, well, do you not know how to do this? That problem with skills is something you shouldn't underestimate. It's really, it becomes very important in industries where technology is really important, that there can be a forgetting, as it were, over time, that a lot of the skills, legal skills as well as engineering skills, kind of disappear as people retire. I hope that point's reasonably clear. So reasonably, it's a surprise to me. It's a puzzle. I've seen it in the nuclear industry. I don't know if Britain has got any. Britain's got any nuclear legal experts. It once had lots, but then suddenly the governments over many years decided we don't want any expansion of the nuclear industry. So as those people retire, other people are not hired. So you find there's a big shortage of knowledge, and it seems that you can get that in other different sectors where specialist skills are necessary, but not necessarily replaced. Remember, the logic of the private company, it's not to be rational, it's to be making money. And your momentum, your resources go where, at this point in time, you think you can make the money. And they'll move according to that. In that sense, the logic's very simple, but it's not academic, it's not scholarly, it's not like a codified system. Okay, so here we've got quite a lot of codification in the natural resources sector, where you can have joint ventures that are that have been used many times around the world. At the moment, you could say this is very unfortunate, but there is an expansion of some of these fossil fuels industries. I don't want to get into all that, but it's certainly, the people that I have talked to have said that there's a lot of business going on right around the world. In many different places, not in the UK, but in many different places. So these joint ventures are becoming used more frequently now than they have been in the last 10 years. And I'm just going to make a few comments about them because they're quite strange. The most common type of agreement is a joint venture is the unincorporated joint venture. And that is one where you have several parties come together to form a joint venture, which is not legally a partnership, and it doesn't involve establishing a separate company. and the parties, as it were, make an alliance, but they agree legally through a contract to have an interest in a particular project, but that interest is kept separate and distinct, even though it's together in one project, but at the same time, in a contradictory way, they're trying to keep it separate. So that the parties are jointly and severally liable. And that makes the arrangement very different from a partnership, where everybody is liable. So it's a very, very different, and it's a very popular, the unincorporated joint venture, very, very common in natural resource projects, particularly fossil fuels ones. And there, why do they happen? Again, it's a little bit like your data centers. Usual reason that the parties just decide to mitigate their risk. There's too much risk, so spread it. Bring in other parties to dilute your interest, yes, but that way the risk is something that might be less scary. One party becomes what's called the operator. So one party becomes the operator. The other parties become non-operating parties. So the operator does the work. The non-operating parties form a committee, an operating committee, and their job is going to be to keep an eye on not on the activity, but the activity and the costs incurred by the operator. Sorry, have I been going too quickly here?
No, an operating committee, but because you said that one party is the operator and does the work, and then the other ones are not operating parties.
Yeah.
They form an operating committee, so right else,
Okay, you have an operating company, let's say Shell, operating company. Why? Not because it's necessarily got money. The key thing is it has technical skill. Remember, this high tech, not many people are able to drill through certain rocks and do it successfully. Some rock formations are dreadfully difficult, even for some of these companies. So we have to say it's Shell, it's the operator. But this is a joint venture. So we have maybe, let's say, 3 other companies. They are the non-operating companies. So they do not operate, but they are parties to the joint venture. So I hope everybody can get what I'm saying. They are parties. To manage the whole thing, you have something called an operating committee. The parties on the operating committee are the operator and the non-operating companies. And the dynamics of that relationship will be that the non-operating companies put pressure on the operator. And the operator tries to do what it wants. But from time to time, it needs to go back to the non-operators and say, we're going to drill a well. Can you give me some money, please? And I don't want it on a one-off basis for the next year. I want it every quarter, a certain amount of money. And this is, they call this a cash call. I need some money, I need this amount, and then they divide it up. Now, the non-operators have got an interest in making sure that that money is wisely spent and also that it doesn't get out of hand. So there has to be a request in advance for expenditure, an AFE, an authorization for expenditure. So the operator comes along and says, can I have authorization for this amount of expenditure, please? and I will be spending it over the next period of say, 12 months. But I'd like the money in these installments. Let me just give you look at this from a slightly different angle, because I was involved in a case that dealt with this when I was I probably can say this. I was actually on the instructed by the government of India. So, but they had a discussion about joint ventures and things like that. And on the other side, I won't tell you, there'll be lots of Indian cases, so you won't know which one it is. But this particular one, on the other side, was a company that had their experts, and they said basically the operator can do pretty much what it wants. And this is normal practice internationally. And so Professor Cameron says, no, it's not. What is normal is that there should be constraints on the operator exercised procedurally through this committee, also the government as well. No, you're wrong. There are lots of examples of models which show that the operator has lots of freedom to do pretty much, to go and spend all sorts of things in a prudent and wise way, but the operator is the technical soul of this joint venture. So my point was, all these models that you're producing and all this experience that you're telling me about is coming from one part of the world, North America. And it's also on land. And the risks are different. And the practice and the customs are different. And what they do, indeed, is they give lots of freedom to the operating company in the joint venture. That's not the case when you get into certain other parts of the world. Just bear with me a moment. For example, anywhere to do with the North Sea, Norway, you can't do this because the amounts of expenditure are too big. The risks are big, the expenditure is very, very large because deep drilling, it could be offshore Nigeria. Say, deep drilling, very expensive. So are you just going to let your operator go ahead and spend this money and then say, by the way, fellow partners, fellow co-venturers, I need some more money. Give it to me, please. You can't have it. You need strict procedures to make sure that that money is sensibly managed. So with these joint ventures, they put them in place. In that particular case, I was saying they had not been followed, and the operator had behaved irresponsibly in contradiction to the requirement that it behave in a prudent way in accordance with good international oil field practice. And I still believe I was quite right. I don't think there's been a decision in that case just yet. But the key thing is, in certain parts of the world, that's not the normal practice. But where I was, sort of part of the world I was looking at, where they had what's called a production sharing contract in India, I thought that was reasonable practice and typical of good, prudent international industry practice. You've got a question there. I'm so hard of hearing you. You have to shout a little bit. Sorry about that.
I'm just wondering if the operator would like to be solely, or is it whether the operator, since basically the operator has the freedom to act in the joint venture, if there's something.
It's a good point. The operator can have sole risk. There's a sole risk provision. So if the operator has the view, look, I think I'd like to spend this money, and if you don't want to spend it, if you don't want to share in the bounty that lies ahead, because I'm convinced this is going to be a great thing, that's okay. Can I do it on my own? Yes, I can. I can exercise this sole risk provision. Off I go on my own. So you've really got the whole thing organized by contract, right? It is not a single company. It is not, I don't know, the Nigerian or the Saudi Arabian petroleum company, and everything's organized inside. This is an unincorporated joint venture, and that's why there is a kind of quasi-war going on between the different parties. And they have disputes, and they have an arbitration clause in their operating agreement, and that is used because they're always at each other. Again, like the guy I met last week, and he said to me, this is something we look at very, very carefully because we're often the operator, and we don't like these people telling us what to do. Of course not. But similarly, they don't want that operator going ahead and committing them to a lot of expenditure. So the reason historically why this developed was because whenever these American model forms were applied in the North Sea area with its deep water, uncertain climate, high cost, it became clear that giving the operator all that freedom to spend money was very unwise. And the non-operating companies just refused to take that responsibility. So that's when they started to build up in those models provisions that protected them from expenditure, which could be quite seriously unpleasant. So that's why you get different models around the world in this industry. You do get quite a lot of models, but there's no such thing as one single international model agreement that would apply to this unincorporated joint venture, despite the fact it's been used for at least 40 years that I'm aware of, and longer in the United States. It goes way, way back. But there's no generally accepted model agreement. But there are many that you can read and benefit from. But there's no you can have an argument about the provisions in many of them. And there is an organization called the Association of International Energy Negotiators, and it has produced a series of these models. And every few years it updates them. I think I put one of them up for lecture 1 on the class website. One of the AIEN models. And they have a different problem actually. Now that I think about it, it's also quite. I don't know how common it is for models, but what they do it's like too much democracy. They say, you, the user of this model, have the following choices. You can have this provision, or this provision, or this provision. There were moments in my life when I thought that was all sounded great choice. Actually, if you are not much of an expert, this is a nightmare because you look and you think, what do I choose? Which is right? Is Professor Cameron here? Tell me, please, what's the right answer? I don't know. The idea is in certain different situations, one of these choices will be right. But it becomes a bit like a multiple choice exam for certain officials in certain countries. Because I know I have one country, Suriname in Latin America, I had a training session with them and they expressly said, we don't want this kind of joint operating model because there are too many choices. You have to tell us what we should be doing in our situation. If we don't agree with you, we'll tell you, but we need to have like more direction. So that is the downside of some of these models, that they can offer you too much choice. Okay, I think probably that's, now, you can get an incorporated joint venture. You can set up a company to go ahead and exploit the resource. So it's not correct that you have only unincorporated ones. you also have some incorporated structures, but they're not quite so many of those. They're not so popular. And another point to keep in mind is that when it comes to marketing the resources, it's quite striking that there is no joint venture there, no joint selling. The moment you get into joint selling, you run into competition laws, antitrust laws from America and so on, and also from the European Union. Same thing, competition law will prohibit joint selling by these very large companies because they immediately assume that what we will see are abusive practices. So whenever you get to them on the marketing side, typically it will not be a joint venture. I've got a few more slides that just elaborate on these points. Here we've got them here, just summarize them. I don't think I've missed anything. One party is appointed the operator, the others are given rights over the budget. JV assets are held by the working interest participants. Decisions are made by the management committee. I think I called it the operating committee. And here you see, again, I've covered all this. I think the funding comes from the parties' working interest. So it could be an odd number. It could be like 12.367, that sort of thing. Productions divided according to participants' percentage interest. So they take their own share separately. If it's oil, by the way, that's mostly transported by ship, which is why you get so much controversy about the closure of some of these narrow geographical spaces through which the oil has to move. There are land pipelines, but the transport by ship is much more common. It's fairly easy, by the way. In fact, somebody was explaining to me that if you transport by ship, you may be vulnerable to these drones attacking you, but a drone attack on an oil ship actually damages a part of the ship, just a part. A drone attack on a gas, an LNG carrier, will just explode the whole thing. It becomes a bomb. But it's not the case with oil. Oil, in terms of as a commodity or as a liquid, it doesn't happen. That doesn't help you very much if you're on board a ship and something like that happens. But again, the whole process of the catastrophe unfolds very slowly, so people can actually get off the ship, usually in time without a loss of life. Anyway, that's on the side. So there you've got authorization for expenditure. AFE is called. Approval is required for the release of funds. And each participant has the right to take its share of production in kind. It may not want to. It may not want the commodity. It might want just to sell it to the operator. To say, look, you take care of it. You've got the ships. You can arrange them. That's fine. Just give us the money. It's all sort of the capitalist companies, so they behave like that. And then when it comes to these documents, there is this annex called the accounting annex, which is, if you ever read any of these contracts, have a look at the accounting annex. I'm sorry, it's a bit boring, especially if you're not an accountant, but you learn a lot about how the contract works. This joint operating agreement is a bit like a constitution. It's of the parties, and it's very, very comprehensive, very detailed, and it governs all their relationships because it's not an incorporated joint venture. As I say, you can have not incorporated and incorporated ones. The incorporated ones will have limited liability, they'll have share capital, they'll have a shareholders agreement. It's less common, but they do occur. One of the situations you might have is where the non-operating parties try and force the operator to carry out some expenditure that doesn't want to carry out, like drill a well. And that's something that the operator is going to be very keen to try and avoid happening. Standardizing the practice. This is like here you've got the problems, and these are the answers. And the models, the existence of models here has been tried many, many times. No globally accepted version, but many JOAs that are models are in existence. You can obtain copies of them. They're not, many of them are in the public domain. I've put one up on the website for you from under the first class from Norway. Again, that's in the public domain, so you're welcome to look at it. Industry companies like BP or Exxon will probably have their own agreements. They have advantages, they save time and money, and as I emphasized, none of them will deal with the unique features of a project. So they are never going to be exactly relevant. And as I pointed out just a few moments ago, in certain situations, I suppose Guyana would be an example of a country where you just don't have the people who understand what a model is. So if you have various options in the model, they're stuck. So I mentioned Suriname, similar, tiny number of people. And government offices always have major problems with staffing. They can't afford to hire many people. Their best people, if they have good people, they might be quite young, doesn't matter. Those people are the people who, however good they are, they're the first to leave because they will simply be made a better offer by the private sector. So keeping really, really good people in the public sector in these offices is enormously difficult. That's why your model has to be as simple as possible and as relevant as possible to those people. And finally, I made that point about new entrants, that industry practice is something which is maybe very clear if you happen to be a big company, big energy company, but not if you happen to be BlackRock or another one of these companies that is basically buying assets or infrastructure around the world and is not terribly interested in the history of those industries. Okay, well, I think that's probably covered everything from, as you see, lots of efforts made to standardize industry practice. That doesn't mean to say that they don't have disputes. They have a lot, but the dispute subject is something we're going to deal with next week, when Ben Giretta is going to be joining us, and we'll go over the advantages and the disadvantages of arbitration in relation to litigation and mediation. Now, finally, what I wanted to do is just make a few comments about the very different project structure that you get when you're dealing with a renewable energy project. Here, something which I don't understand is that it seems that in the renewable sector, there really is a very strong impulse towards standard contracts. The sort of thing we've been hearing about in the oil sector, all those models, but they don't have them. And what they do have, it seems, I've heard this from quite a few lawyers, is a tendency to produce some really, really awful contracts. I mean, really badly drafted contracts, either too long, too short, too vague, you name it. I mean, a lot of the language is poor quality legal work. And I don't quite know why this has happened, but I certainly think it's a big discussion point amongst all the people I've met from the industry. How can we try and improve the quality of drafting of the contracts in this sector? It's not all that new either. I mean, it's about at least 20 years old, this industry sector. So quite why this should be the case. The big here you've got in terms of the structures, you've got lenders, you've got your project company, special purpose vehicle. I think one of you sent me a message about a dissertation to do with that SPVs, which I haven't replied to yet. And developers, and these contracts here, the power purchase agreement, PPA, you also get them used with data centers, by the way. So knowing something about power purchase agreements, of which there are several different kinds, is quite useful. It's because there may not be a standard type of agreement, but it certainly it comes up again and again in different sectors. Well, it's about an agreement to buy power from the generator and use it in your data center or in a company. Power purchase agreement. But that's really something for another time. It's quite a complex area. But you see, you've got your special purpose vehicle, you've got your developer. Lender is really very important because often in this industry, renewables, the company that is developing the project will borrow the money. When I was talking about the oil industry, it's very different. The companies have got the capital and they commit the capital. Here, the developer may well just decide that it's going to borrow the money and fund the project with debt. That creates different dynamics, and it means that the bank or the lender is attracted to the project because once it's established, then over time, the costs will decline quite quickly. The costs will decline, and the tariff that is agreed on will be constant over many years. So what happens is that over possibly a 20-year period, there is a return that is very stable. It's very predictable. Banks like this. So you just get every year a certain amount of income. And you can invest in the long term, and it's very predictable. It is not like the natural resources sector where you are taking risks. And the risks might be big. I've been talking about the costs, but for those operating companies, but you might be producing a commodity like oil that you can monetize very quickly every day and so literally millions and millions of dollars you will be making every day once you're successful. But if you fail, you're making nothing. Whereas with the renewable sector, you put your equipment in place, and then as long as the sun shines, as long as the wind's running, you get your return. It's very predictable. If you get the right kind of contract with the government backing you up, if the wind doesn't blow, the government will pay you. You may be generating electricity, but the government says we don't want any electricity, the grid's full, there's no space. What do you say? Pay me. And they will pay you. So it's very odd. Some of these odd things happen. The money just keeps coming. It isn't huge, but it's got a regularity to it. Lenders like this. It means you can predict the flow of cash over time, unless the government reneges on its promises and changes the tariff system. Some, but not many, but Spain did that notoriously. But not many countries have done that, but you get that predictability. So in that means over there you've got the lenders. Lenders play an important role in the renewable energy business because they like the guaranteed returns over time. It's an extremely different business from your oil business. Some people don't understand that. It's not complicated. I don't know why they don't understand. But basically, it's a very different business. So people who make comparisons are comparing apples and pears. They're different businesses. In terms of making money, the oil business remains very, very attractive, I'm afraid. It's bad for the climate. There is that what's called an externality. The cost is one that we pay, which is that basically the environment gets worse. And some people who live in communities around the oil installations have an additional cost in terms of oil spills and other damages and so on. But with renewables, it's more like a predictable, steady, whatever, and obviously far, far better for the environment. Except with the qualification that in terms of planning, you might find that a lot of natural space is taken up by these structures, and that as a result, there's maybe some damage to the biodiversity. There's a cost in terms of the natural landscape and so on. So it's not free from criticism, but it's certainly environmentally a big step forward compared with the fossil fuels. So that I've just tried to give you some idea of the different business model and the lack of standard contracts. This seminar we've got coming up in May, I hope we're going to get some. I'm going to get some enlightenment of just why it seems to be so difficult to get good contract design in the renewable sector. It's variable. It's not that they're all bad contracts. It's just that the quality, the legal quality, seems to be very varied. I can't believe this is going to continue because just about every major law firm in London is doing work on the renewable energy sector at the moment. There's just such a lot of interest in it. It's not driven by climate, it's driven by all sorts of other factors, including the climate advantage. But renewables is very much a strong industry in Europe. Okay, well I think probably, let me just see what project contract structure, power purchase. Here we go, there's a definition of it. Model contracts, no. Conclusions, efforts at harmonization are likely to prove influential, less likely to prove influential than efforts at tackling specific common problems. Models are common in some sectors. Standardization is still a long way off in new sectors like digital economy and renewables. So that is the point where we reach the end. And here we go, a happy conclusion. This will be you at some point too, throwing your hats in the air, or whatever it is you're going to throw, and a happy graduation. So I will be back next week, along with my guest, and we will be talking about international arbitration, international litigation, dispute resolution, things like that. Very, very important area to know about and to plan for. So we're going to have an exciting session, and some of you, I think, want to have the slides a bit earlier. So what your student rep told me about that. So I will make sure that next week you get your slides at least a day earlier than the class, okay? And I'll also try and make sure you get some reading before the class as well, okay? So sorry if there's a little bit inconvenience there, but we're really trying to be more efficient. Okay, thank you. Safe home. Yeah.
So I want to go into law.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask, I'll probably forget to sign up for the event in May. But are there like any specific events I could attend, like and
Have a third selection. Come to that. I don't know when you send me an email, and I'll make sure that I direct you really to the person who organizes the lecture, and you will get an invitation.
That's CCLS.
Yes. Just send an email to me. But the meetings usually are held at Lucas and Tea. Okay? All right, good.
I love the lecture today.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
really
you very much.
So I'm really interested in the networking event, but
Oh, that one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, May the 14th.
so what can I do? How do I go about it? All right, thank you
All right?
so much.
You send me an email.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Hello.
Actually, I wanted to ask an organizational question. Next week, I'll be in Vienna performing in Bismuth on behalf of Queen Mary. So, thank you very much. So, I wanted to ask, what is necessary to receive a kind of permission to skip the lecture, or like, how does it work in Queen Mary?
I need to go to toilet.
Because unfortunately, I won't be able to attend it.
Oh, you'll be doing it's a good point. Would you mind sending me an email, and I will direct you to the person who sent it. Yeah, I'm not very sure. Direct. I'm not really sure. But get yourself clear.
Okay, so I'll write you an email, but is it possible to find your email on QM Plus? Okay, yeah, sure. So yes, we will direct you an email. Thank you very much.
One moment, just one moment. I'm just trying to have a quick. Just wondered where I put my phone. It's okay, I found it. Sure. Oh. You didn't know? Oh, yes, because I've got it fixed for Thursday. I forgot to mention that. You should have told me. I forgot. Oh, right. Can you send a message? Definitely. What time? There's one Thursday and one Friday. Yeah, in fact, I think it was on the website.
But something said that they had it on Thursday here, and then they kind of changed it, just got
No worries,
rid of
that's
that
fine.
thing.
See you.
It's possible somebody else, it's not me, somebody might have changed it who's in the admin.
At least one.
Definitely, and I think there are 3.
So it's two on Friday and one on Thursday.
That's right. That's right. Two on Friday, for sure. And then there's one on Thursday. I think Thursday might be 1 to 2. Is it 12 to 1?
On Friday.
But yeah, that's right. I think it's 1 to 2 on Thursday, and then I think it's on Friday. Say it's 12 to 1. Then there's one 2 to 3. I think. I'm pretty sure.
I'll email them. Some people told me that they just disappeared.
Please send the email because that's definitely on.
And there's only one that we need to attend. We don't need to attend only 3 of them.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi.
I just needed the check-in code, please.
Oh,
Let's take it down.
here we are. That's it at the top. Good.